most self-indulgent video I've ever made. Though to be fair, all of my videos are self-indulgent. Hi, hello, my name is Trina, and I was an avid childhood reader before school sucked the love and joy out of it for me, and I've rediscovered reading as an adult. I have recently been inspired to think a lot about the childhood books I read, not just because I think about them all the time, because they're part of my psyche, but also because there have been so many fun trends recently. Specifically on TikTok, I've seen trends like the before there was this, there was you, or people going through the books they read at each era in their life going backwards, which I think is adorable and so much fun. And also I love Carrie Can Read, and I saw her book tag video where she talks about her like origin story for books. This isn't quite that, but I wanted to give it a shout out because it did inspire me to think more about what books I loved as a kid and wondering, would I love them as much as an adult as I did as a kid? Can I bring back some of that magic of childhood reading by rereading these books as an adult? So that's what I want to do. Now, can I 100% say that every book I read and loved as a kid is the best piece of literature on earth? No. Do I think I'm still gonna love them because nostalgia is the driving factor in my life? Probably. I have high hopes. A lot of books I read as a kid, I reread probably 4 or 5 plus times. I didn't own most of them. The stack of books is a recent development that I'll mention in a second, but as a kid, I was a big library kid. In the recent years, when I've been going to a bunch of like used bookstores, I keep finding copies of books I loved as a kid, and I want to buy them and own copies for myself of them. So that's why I've built up a little collection. I don't think I'm gonna read all of these in this video, not even close. In particular, for example, like Jane of Lantern Hill by Ella Montgomery, the author of Anne of Green Gables, I've actually reread recently, so I know that it stands up to adult me. I reread it in like 2022, and I still adored it. But I have a specific 4 that I think we can get through for this video. And please let me know if you read any of these as a kid. I thought I would start in age order. So I wanted to start off with rereading The Frog Princess. This is a book I remember reading in elementary school that is a lot like the Disney version, but I read this and it came out before, I think Disney's, what was it called? The Princess Frog? Princess and the Frog. Before Disney's The Princess and the Frog even came out, there was The Frog Princess, about a young princess who is kind of out of step with her family and her world, and she kisses a frog, and instead of the frog becoming a prince, she becomes a frog. And I remember this is a part of like a 7-book series or something like that, where there's also about her daughter, and they become dragons and lizards at certain points, and all sorts of magical stuff is happening. But I have not reread this since I was like in the 3rd grade, and I thought it would be really fun and nostalgic to pick it up and give it a reread. So we're gonna be starting off with this, starting with my youngest version of myself. I need to get these half price stickers off. Most of these I found at half price for like $2. That's why I own them. The only one of this stack that is the original copy I owned as a child is this book called Room in the Heart. This is a romance book set in Copenhagen, in København, Denmark, where my mom's family is Danish, so I had a lot of books set in Denmark, but it is written in English, and it's set during World War II, and it's about basically the German occupation of Denmark and getting as many Jewish people out of Copenhagen as they possibly can. And the story, if you don't know, the story of Denmark during World War II is really interesting because there wasn't a huge Jewish population in Denmark, but the people that were there, the majority of Jewish people in Denmark, other than the ill or the elderly, were able to escape with the help of their neighbors, and were like sent on ships to Sweden, where they were protected by Sweden, which was never invaded by Germany. So this is the story of that told from the perspective of kids. I don't know if it's gonna hold up because it is an older book, but I must have read this like a dozen times as a kid, so I really want to reread this. Then I have, which book is the next age group? Probably this book. The Ranger's Apprentice series by John Flanagan was my fantasy origin story. I truly believe that. I think that this book is my origin of loving epic fantasy as an adult. This is a fantasy book about kind of in a medieval setting about a young man named Will who is raised with like some other orphans in the home of a local lord, or like in the household of like a local leader, and they're all supposed to join different guilds when they turn 14, 16, when they get older. And Will really wants to become a knight, but he's very small and isn't chosen to become a knight, and it's devastating for him. But instead, he is selected by the Rangers, which are like basically spies, like secretive bow and arrow shooting men on horseback running through the woods. And he is really good at climbing walls and being like secretive. So he's recruited instead to apprentice with the Rangers. And I remember loving these books. I read all 10 of the original series. I haven't read any of the spin-offs, but if I like the reread of this first book, maybe I'll read the rest of the series or read the spin-offs again. I don't know. I might have aged out of it, unfortunately, but I remember absolutely adoring these books, and I remember absolutely adoring Will, all of the characters. And then there's also a character named Alice that I also loved. And Halt. Oh my god, Halt. Oh, I loved these books as a kid, and I haven't reread them since I was in middle school. So when I saw a copy of this original cover in a book box, like a little free library in DC, you know I grabbed this. I was so excited. So I'm really excited to see if the OG fantasy story for me holds up. And then lastly, did anyone else read these? Did anyone else read Maximum Ride by James Patterson, the Maximum Ride series? This is a series not written by James Patterson. Most books with his name on it aren't actually written by James Patterson. I think it's ghost written by, I don't even know who it's ghost written by, probably several authors. But this is one of James Patterson's rare young adult series that is about a group of kids who are kidnapped by like a government agency and experimented on and given wings, basically. Like they're like given bird DNA somehow and are like merged with birds. So they have, as you can tell from the cover, they have wings. And they escape from that government agency in this first book, in the beginning of this first book, and have to like learn how to survive on their own while fleeing from this giant conspiracy. So I have not reread this again since I was little, and I'm really looking forward to rereading it and seeing if my nostalgic obsession with these bird people has carried over into my adulthood. But yeah, like I said, I'm gonna start off with rereading The Frog Princess, and I'm hoping that this will just be like a nice nostalgic trip down memory lane for me, and that this video also takes you on a fun nostalgic trip down memory lane. But yeah, I'll give this a read and then come back and give you an update. Okay, but I used to write short stories as a kid, and I can tell that I got the writing style exactly from this book. Because like a line like this, like, I couldn't help but laugh. I guffawed, I chortled, I wheezed, I laughed like I always do. It's just something that I would have found so clever when I was little. I would have loved that. And I'm still, like, I'm so nostalgia goggled that I'm like, I find it so cute still. And then also just my love now for like sassy character relationships, like sassy love interests. The frog in this book where he goes, I couldn't help it, my lip began to quiver. Don't do that, he said. This is fresh water and you're going to make it salty. 2 big tears rolled down my cheeks. Now what's wrong? And I'm like, wow, this is like my origin story in more ways than one. Lil, if I kiss him and he does wake up, I'm not gonna have to marry him, am I? Nah, you won't have to marry him unless you want to. Good, I want to keep my options open. This book explains so much about me as an adult. That was really cute. I don't have time for a long update right now, but I finished it. Cute. Hi, hello. I did finish reading the first book for this video. and I wanted to talk about it in some more detail. But first, I wanted to say, would it be alright if I changed the agenda a little bit? Not removing any of the books, but there's one more I thought of that I didn't originally have on my list that I think would be so perfect to read right now, and that is Heidi. If you've never heard of Heidi, it's an old classic that's set, I believe, in the springtime, about a young girl who's sent up to live with a goat herd, like, or a goat herd, I don't know, like a guy who minds goats, up in the Swiss Alps, like up in the mountains. And I came to think of it because recently I was traveling, and it's springtime here, and it just, like, I had like a sudden yearning to reread that book, and that one's also one of my favorites from my childhood, so I thought it would fit perfectly in with this video. So if it's okay with you, I think that might be the next book I pick up. I might pick up Heidi. I don't have a physical copy of it with me here, but it is available on Libby, and so I think I might check out a copy of Heidi and read that one next. It'll mix up the vibe a little bit, but that was a book I vividly remember they had on display in my elementary school library. And we used to go into the library for story times during elementary school, and I saw it there, and I remember checking that out and reading it for the first time. I must have read it like a dozen times after that, but I really, really loved Heidi when I was a kid, and I think it's like the perfect vibe right now to read that. It's a springtime book, so I think that's going to be the next book I pick up. But before I do that, I did want to talk about The Frog Princess, because I did finish this. I mentioned at the beginning of the video, this is a children's fantasy book. So I think it is like age group elementary school. I read it at least in early elementary school. It's only 200 pages, and it's part of, like I said, a very long series. So this first book doesn't get too in-depth in any of that, but it was a fun little blast from the past. Like, I vividly remember the writing style, like the kind of like childlike version, like kid-friendly version of sassy banter in this book between the romantic leads, the main couple, even though they're like 14 years old. But when it's a book meant for, like, I read it when I was like 7, so for me 14, they seem very adult. Yes, absolutely, you guys are ready to be engaged as teenagers. When I read this as like a small child, it does introduce, I think, the rest of the series really well in terms of the main girl, Emma, Princess Esmeralda, Emma for short, gets turned into a frog accidentally because she kisses a prince that's been turned into a frog, and even though she's a princess, she gets turned into a frog because she's wearing a bracelet that's supposed to protect her from curses that reverses them, but then it accidentally, in this case, reverses it. It's a whole thing, but I like this. I think it's really nostalgic for me. I'm like, oh my god, I forgot his name was Edric. Like, I remember the name Edric, and I remember the name Princess Emma, and I remember these characters. But I do think, as I was reading, I was like, now I remember my favorite books in this series, the ones I remember reading the most, I think are actually about Princess Emma, in this book's daughter, and because I think she's the one who in later books gets a storyline where her love interest is like a dragon, or she's a dragon, or something like that. Like, there are dragons involved, and I remember there being a book, one of the books they're stuck in like a cave together, and I remember I loved that book. So I had a good time with this. It was definitely like the hit of childhood nostalgia that I was looking for. But now it's made me want to just go back and maybe read the whole series. It wouldn't take me that long because, like I said, they're kids' books. I just read this in like a couple of hours today. So I kind of want to go back to do that, but I have other books on my agenda. It's a little bit dated, of course. It's from 2002. It's not something necessarily that I would be like, yes, peak childhood literature. But it was that for me. It was important for me, and it definitely is the origin to a lot of romance tropes that I like as an adult. So I'm happy I got to reread this. But that was book 1 down, and like I said, I think I'm gonna pick up Heidi next, and then I'm gonna get into the other books, if you forgot, after Heidi. But I think Heidi's next chronologically as well, because just like The Frog Princess, I read Heidi in elementary school. A lot. So that's like the same age range I was in when I read it, and I think I want to continue with that pattern. So we're gonna pick up Heidi. We're gonna enjoy the springtime weather. It's gorgeous and green and like Like, I even saw two frogs out hopping the other day, so it's the perfect season to do this. And I'm hoping that I still love Heidi just as much as I did when I was a little kid. Hi, little update. It's taken me much longer to read Heidi because I didn't realize Heidi's like 400 pages long, the book. I mean, obviously, it's written in a very like childlike style. It's very simplistic, so it's not like it's difficult to get through it all. Like, it's going really fast, but it is much longer than like a regular children's book. How far am I? I'm about halfway through at the moment. Okay, to start off with, I love it. I still love Heidi just as much as I did when I was a kid and I was reading it for the first time. It starts off with this little 5-year-old girl, Heidi, being dropped off by her aunt, I believe, her mother's sister, to her father's father, her grandfather's house. And he lives at the top of a mountain and takes care of 2 goats and is kind of reviled by the town at the base of the mountain. They see him as like an outcast because he doesn't want to be amongst them. But in reality, he's just like had a hard life and he doesn't like gossip and he doesn't like what they say about him. So that's why he's kind of more isolated. He's just an introvert, just my introvert grandpa. And Heidi goes up there and she loves it there. She loves living on the mountain. She loves running about in the summer with the goats. And like, she belongs up there. She belongs in nature. And the descriptions are just gorgeous. Like, the thing which attracted her most, however, was the waving and roaring of the 3 old fir trees on these windy days. She would run away repeatedly from whatever she might be doing to listen to them, for nothing seemed so strange and wonderful to her as the deep, mysterious sound in the tops of the trees. She would stand underneath them and look up, unable to tear herself away, looking and listening while they bowed and swayed and roared as the mighty wind rushed through them. Like, the descriptions are just absolutely stunning. I'm so obsessed. And I'm currently at the point, I think I'm realizing now why I remember this book being so much shorter, is because I'm at the part where when she's around 8 years old, her aunt comes back for her and she's like, I've gotten her a great place in a rich house in Frankfurt as a companion to a lady. Like, we're gonna bring her back to Frankfurt. And Heidi doesn't want to go, but she kind of gets tricked into it because her aunt is like, oh, you can come back anytime. Just come with me now. You're being ridiculous. And Heidi goes there because she's so sweet and she's so nice. And it's not like the people in Frankfurt or even her aunt are like cruel people. That's what I love about books like this. It's like the people that she's interacting with aren't like, they're not like sinister people who mean her ill. They just don't get it. They're just not like her. They're not like grandfather. They have a different path in life and she walks her own path. And I feel like that's probably why I connected to this book so much as a child, because like every kid feels like that. You feel like you are special, that you're not like everyone else, that you feel so different. And reading books like this as a kid where the differences are celebrated and everyone else who can't accept differences are like, they're in the wrong. I don't know, like that means so much to kids, so I can definitely understand why like this resonated so much with me as a child. But yeah, we're at the part right now where she's in Frankfurt in the city, and I think when I was little I just skipped these chapters. Like, I remember these much less than I do the parts where she was in the mountain, because when I was little I just liked reading about her up in the Swiss Alps, like up in the mountains. And those descriptions of nature, and I think I just skipped the Frankfurt chapters when I was a kid. But I just wanted to give that update because I love Heidi. It doesn't even, like, I feel like I'm not even like rereading like a kid's book right now. It just feels like it's so timeless. It feels the same way I felt when I was reading, I have it up here. When I was rereading Jane of Lantern Hill recently, which is also technically like a children, young person's book, but written in an era before they had a proper children's book. And I wish more people still wrote like that. Just like, you just wrote literature that was accessible. And whether or not a child picked it up or an adult picked it up, there weren't as like strict rules. It was just like, I feel like we need more books like that in the present day, because these are just so, like, I loved them when I was in elementary school, and I love them when I'm 25 years old, and that is like really special. I don't know. I really, really enjoy that. So I'm gonna finish Heidi like now, probably this afternoon. I'm just like, it's the perfect springtime book to read ever. So I'm just gonna sit down and finish it up and keep going with the video. Hello. I finished Heidi. Lots of thoughts and feelings. It's definitely such a nostalgia hit. Like, it's one of those books that, while I haven't read it since I was probably 10 years old, it's been like 15 years since I read Heidi. The last time, I read it so many times when I was little that every single page, it like sparks a memory. Like, oh yes, I do remember this. Oh yes, I do remember this. Like, so I could read it pretty quickly because it was just like stirring up so many memories, and so I love it for that. And it's also just like I was saying before, a beautiful old classic. But I will say, I didn't remember. I have some lore to drop in terms of like, I didn't remember how much religion plays into this. It makes sense. It's a book written in Switzerland in the 1880s, and a lot of it is very sermony. You get the normal childhood life lessons, but each life lesson is like, and make sure you do this because of God and Christianity and so on and so forth. It's just funny to me because like that is, it's a beautiful meaning if you are religious. And I think if you are religious, I think that this book would be like so beautiful to you, because there's a lot of literary comparison being drawn between religion and God and nature, and like that the mountain and being up in this mountain causes miracles and creates miracles just like God does. So there's a lot of like, if you are religious and you enjoy nature, there's a lot of great similes and relationships happening there that I think is really nice. It's just, the only reason that makes it funny is just that I remember none of it. I was so non-religious as a child, like I had zero conception of like any sort of relationship with religion at all, that I just like must have skimmed those paragraphs. I did not remember half of like the sermons in this book. And it's funny to me because this has come up with other childhood books that I've read, like Ella Montgomery, like other old classics I read as a kid, or even just like short stories where they have like a lesson in there about like Christianity, like they're Christian based. I was just immune to religious indoctrination as a child because all of that slid right off me. I remember absolutely none of it. But yeah, that's my lore drop in terms of, I must have like, my brain as a child was like completely not listening to anything having to do with religion. So it's just funny to go back and read it now and see that those parts don't stick in my memory and my psyche at all, but so much of the rest of Heidi does stick with me really, really hard. So either way, I still really love it. It's a product of its time, but it is like it's almost like transcendentalist in the way that it talks about like the landscape being your relationship with a countryside and your relationship with your community and your relationship with religion, and tying all those things together. So I think it does a lot of great things. It's just like a product of its time for sure. I adore Grandfather, and I adore Heidi, and I adore all the little side characters, even Peter and Clara and all of them. So it was really fun to go back and re-explore that world, and I'm happy I read it. So now we continue on. I think originally I was going to do Room in the Heart next. These are the two I'm deciding between next. But Room in the Heart is also European historical fiction, kind of like Heidi, even though I guess it wasn't historical fiction when it was written, but it has a similar concept. So I think I might save that, and I might jump into a fantasy book next. I might read Ranger's Apprentice, The Ruins of Gorlan. I really hope this holds up. In my head, the Ranger's Apprentice series holds such like a throne in my head from my childhood. Like, it meant so much to me that I really hope that this is as good as I remember it was. It's not going to be for my age range currently. Like, it's not going to be comparable to, I don't know, N.K. Jemisin or the things I'm reading now as an adult. But this series meant so much to me, so I'm really hoping that nostalgia carries me through. So I'm really excited for that. So I'm gonna jump right into this. It's only taking me like a day to read the other 2 books, so it's a children's book, but I might get started this afternoon. I might save it for tomorrow morning, give myself a break, but yeah, I'm gonna keep going with my reread-a-thon, which is bringing up all of the nostalgic feels right now. I think I'm seeing some blue sky. It has been hailing on and off today, but I really want to sit outside and read. Okay, it might still be hailing actually. Okay, well, at some point, whenever the hail stops, then I'm gonna sit outside for a little bit because we're getting springtime weather and I want to enjoy it and read my books outside.
The moment it happens, this is so far, this is holding up the best. I'm so impressed by, like, the writing is actually really good, although it's like simplistic, although it's meant for children. It's so good so far, and like, oh, it's everything I remember it being. I love this book. Love how Halt says that the role of a ranger is to enforce the law, that they search for evidence for crimes, we investigate when crimes are committed, like there's some sort of detectives. And as far as I can remember about this 10-book series, I don't think Will investigates a single crime throughout this entire series. He is always on the battlefield instead. So it's just like funny. It's like, I really don't remember him ever being an amateur detective once throughout the entire series. Sorry for all the interjections, especially with the sun behind me, but the world building eats so hard, and I forgot. It's basically just medieval England, of course, but it's about the way that John Flanagan goes about establishing it. Like, we're constantly introduced to, oh, here's a bow. I learned how to make this bow. It's less common in this region, but it's more common in that region. Here's a knife. It's similar to the knife used in this region, but we have better steel, so we use this steel, and this stone is available here. And it's just like, although the world, I guess the world itself is relatively simple, it's like it's medieval Viking era England. It's folded in such a good way, and like to a lot of young people, they may not be familiar with that kind of standard fantasy world building, which is why I always say that this was my foundation for fantasy, because it's like your first introduction to that kind of fantasy world building.
Hi, hello. I just want to start this off by saying, have you ever read a book that like makes you absolutely like giddy? Like, you can't explain why, and you're reading the book and you are ignoring those red flags, you're ignoring any flaws that could be had in the story because you're just so in love with it that like it's perfect to you, and like it makes you feel like that childlike glee of reading a book or watching a movie that you love, and then you just want to go back and reread it immediately afterwards. Because that's how I'm feeling after rereading The Ranger's Apprentice, first book, Ruins of Gorlan, for the first time since I was probably 9 or 10 years old. This still hits. This hits so hard for me. Like, obviously, this is a children's fantasy, or at least middle grade, I would say, probably middle grade fantasy book. So there are things wrong with it. You know, like the same way like people can read Percy Jackson and be like, there are things wrong with it. The main character is a little bit of a blank slate. He has character traits. He's like very energetic, very curious, nosy, quick thinking. But for at least this first book, those are kind of like general traits applied to children, because the idea is children will read it and put themselves in the main character. That happens a lot in children's fantasy, you know? But it's just, I didn't mind it at all, because I grew up with this book. So Will, to me, the main character Will is me. And I am him, and I grew up with this character, and it all just came flooding back to me as I read this. I was giggling and kicking my feet, and I was so excited, and I really, really love this. And honestly, even if you're an adult reader, if you're looking for a way to get into more high fantasy, I wouldn't discount the Ranger's Apprentice books, even though they're like middle grade fantasy, because there's something about it that's so like stable and foundational and clean about the world building and the character building. But there's something still so relatable and heartwarming about every single character and the journeys they go through, even in just this first book. Like, the language wasn't too simplistic or too childlike. It was a great kind of like medieval fantasy-esque language type and writing, and it all worked so well. It follows a very classic hero's journey arc for the first book, in terms of Will in the beginning wants to be a knight, a soldier, because he believes his father was a knight. And he's an orphan now, living as like a ward of a local baron in the castle of the baron, with a bunch of other wards, orphans that are taken in by the baron. And because that they're orphans, they don't have the same connections in order to learn a craft. Like, they don't have connections with their parents' craft to learn, or with a community in the same way. So the baron chooses a craft for them, assigns them to a position, something that they'd be good at. Will is unfortunately rejected when he asks to become a knight, because he's too small, he's too short. But instead he's offered a position with the Rangers, who are also like military force, but they are more like, they're meant to be quick moving. They mainly ride horses around, gathering intelligence. I think Halt literally describes them as like an intelligence force. And Will becomes an apprentice under the local ranger, Halt, who's assigned to this baronry, this area. And Will starts discovering that he loves being a ranger. Will slowly learns that he can be a badass, kind of, even though he's a ranger and not a knight. And that he can still do the things that he considers important, which is like fighting for people and fighting for the country, even if he's not a knight. And like in the last chapter, he chooses once and for all to be a ranger. Like, he doesn't just, the choice isn't made for him, he also makes the choice. And the last line of the last chapter is, "For, standing a little aside from the crowd, wrapped in his gray and green mottled cloak, his eyes shadowed by the cowl, was Halt, and he was smiling." So like, after the whole book of him not smiling, the first time Halt smiles to Will is when Will is not only chosen by Halt, but now chooses Halt back and chooses the ranger lifestyle. And I'm just like, so hero's journey. Because Will and Halt were such important characters to me as a kid, all of their familial dynamic is just my origin story for things I love in fantasy. So it was so nice to see this hold up. Honestly, I kind of just want to keep reading immediately. I think the second book is The Burning Bridge, if I'm remembering right. Yeah, the second book is The Burning Bridge. I could just do that in my free time, or let me know in the comments if you'd be interested in me like reading the entire 10-book series. I think as a kid, I aged out of the series around the 8th or 9th book, and I stopped reading them. But honestly, I don't even want to say I aged out of the series. More like I aged out of reading. I entered high school and no longer had any time to spend at the library. But if you would be interested in me doing a video of like completely rereading this childhood series, I know people who usually do those kinds of videos, they're reading like quote unquote cringe young adult series from the 2000s, older series like that there's a level of comedy for it, and I don't know if I would be able to muster that for this series because I'd just be reading it and adoring it. So maybe that wouldn't be the most fun video, but do let me know. I love this. I'm so happy I read this again. And that means we're officially past the halfway point of this video. Hopefully it's going quickly. I've managed to edit it down to a relatively fast-paced video where I'm just like reading kids' books and revisiting my childhood. But that means I have 2 more books left. I have Room in the Heart, which is a historical children's fiction, and I have Maximum Ride by James Patterson, the first book in the Maximum Ride series, which is urban fantasy. So since I just read a fantasy, I think I'm going to pick up this historical fiction first, and then we're going to end on Maximum Ride, which should be a doozy. This might be a better series to do a video about, because if I'm remembering correctly, these books are kind of nuts. As much as I loved them as a kid, I do think they were pretty nuts. But that means I'm going to pick up Room in the Heart next. And I would say out of all the books in this video, this is probably the one no one who's watching this has ever heard of. If you have heard of this book, if you read it as a kid, definitely let me know, because that's so funny. Because I think this is specifically something that my parents picked up for me because it's set in Copenhagen and my mom's family is Danish. But I'll give you a little bit of a plot summary from the back before starting. Julie has always loved her life in Copenhagen, Denmark. While many Jews are being persecuted in other countries by Nazis, Julie's family and friends have a safe haven of peace and security. Then comes the morning when German planes fly overhead, dropping leaflets that state the Germans are occupying Denmark. Now, Julie lives in fear that her family and friends will be torn apart. Her friend Niels does what he can to help mount a growing resistance to Nazi rule, but small rebellions just aren't enough. Yeah, I think there is like a subplot of like a romance between the character of Niels and Julie. I remember really, really enjoying this book as a kid, and it meant a lot to me. I don't know how well it's going to hold up as an adult, but I feel like it wouldn't be right to not read it for this video, especially because this is my original copy from childhood. That's why it's so yellow. So I think it's a fun addition to the video, even though no one's ever probably heard of it. It's only 285 pages, so I should be able to knock this out today or tomorrow. It is raining, unfortunately, at the moment. Our early spring summery days are gone, so it's gonna be raining for the next week, so I will have nothing to do but cozy up and read. Wait, look, I found this old bookmark from when I was a kid in here, where it's like, I don't even know if that shows up on camera, but it's like a little optical illusion of a kitten and a puppy. That's so fun. I can't believe that survived in this book for so long. This might sound crazy from someone who's like, I live in the middle of nowhere, but I want to move back to a city so bad. Sorry, this is a side note, but I'm just like, it's a beautiful spring day out in nature, it's gorgeous, but I just really want some good Mexican food and a matcha latte at the end of this walk, and it's just gonna be my kitchen. So I need to move back to a city. Stat. I'm discovering new types of weather previously unheard of. This one, the weather app is calling wintry slush, which basically means it almost looks like it's snowing once every 5 minutes, and then it goes back to raining.
I like just woke up, but it's June. Or it's not June, but it's like a week out from June. What happened here?
Alright, this might be terrible lighting, but it's a cozy rainy day outside and I really wanted to capture that, so we'll just deal with being backlit because it's worth it for the water running down the glass behind me. Hi! Welcome back. It's been a couple of rainy days. I spent the morning today cozied up with the rain outside, even more violent than it is right now, like actually really hard rainstorms, and like at night they become snowstorms, so we wake up and there's snow all over the ground, and then it melts away throughout the rainy morning, and it's just like the best feeling ever. So I spent the morning enjoying that, editing my Oslo bookshop tour, which should be out by now if all goes to plan, and just in general having a very good time, a very cozy time. I also finished Room in the Heart. As expected, it took me an hour or two to finish. It went really fast, partially because out of all the books, I think I remember this one the best so far. Possibly because the others are parts of, for the most part other than Heidi, parts of series where I read the entire series, so the contents of one specific book maybe didn't like stick with me as hard, versus this is a one-off historical fiction for children that I remember very clearly because I've read it so many times when I was a little kid. And I can say definitely I am no longer as into historical fiction as I used to be, sadly. I can see why I loved it as a kid, for sure. The language, this is a very not well-known book, so the writing isn't anything crazy. The language is quite stiff, and I liked that for a book that's supposed to be set in Copenhagen, because for me it reminds me a lot of how my Danish family, including my mom, talks when they speak in English, that like your language variety, your grammar becomes more stilted, so it reads kind of like a book that was translated from Danish to English, so that adds the realism, and it's quite comforting to me because it reminds me of how my mom talks and how my family talks. So I feel like that would have hit especially hard for little me. And I think I remember as a kid there's dual POV between Julie and Niels. Julie, who is Jewish, living in Copenhagen with her family, and Niels, who is not Jewish, but he aids the saboteurs or the rebellion forces, people who are like trying to work against the German occupying forces. And they're connected because Niels's younger sister is Julie's best friend. Their families are intertwined in that way, and we sort of swap back and forth between those two POVs throughout the book. I remember as a child, I connected much stronger with Julie because I connected more to her, how she related to the world and how she felt, and her worries were more similar to my own at that age. As an adult, though, I really appreciate Niels' story in this as well, because it deals very strongly with the fact that Niels' best friend from childhood, like practically his brother, his closest friend, Emil, is very like uncomfortably sympathetic with the Nazi occupiers. They're both only like 16, 17 years old, but Emil is like, oh, I want to join the army. Like the Danish army is sending people to go help fight in the front against the communists. We hate the communists. And Niels is really, really uncomfortable with this from the beginning of the book, and he's forced to reckon with the fact that he can love this person so dearly who's just so wrong and has so much hate in them that he didn't know existed, and that like the childhood cruelties, like the little things that in day-to-day life were just pranks or jokes and could be like passed over, suddenly become super relevant as they become adults who have to deal with adult issues and adult consequences to their actions. So that conflict, I feel like, is really compelling to adult me when reading this book. But like I said, I didn't connect with it maybe the same way because the genre is not really for me anymore. Enough said about Room in the Heart. It definitely still holds space in my child heart because of how many times I read it as a kid and how much I loved it, but not going to be one that I reread a ton as an adult. Maybe if I ever get back into my historical fiction era, but it was really fun to revisit it and like have these more like nuanced thoughts and like conversations about it as an adult. So that was Room in the Heart, and that means we are on to the last book of the video. I'm very, very excited. I don't know what to expect from The Angel Experiment. Maximum Ride, The Angel Experiment by James Patterson is the last book for this video. Now, I say these are childhood favorites. The Maximum Ride series as a whole was one of my childhood favorites, but if you've ever heard of this series, you've probably heard that the later books in the series, like the last books, become incredibly unhinged. Like suddenly we are dealing with like the end of the world, and they completely lose the plot in a lot of ways. I personally think the books always lost the plot, like that was the charm of them, but I digress. But as a child, those later books, those insane books, were actually my favorites in the whole series. So when I did rereads, I primarily reread the last 4 or 5 books in the series because that was when the love triangle came up and I was a little romantic. So I haven't actually read the first book very often. So this specific book, it might be more similar to how The Frog Princess felt, where I was like, oh, I remember this, I like this. But that emotional connectivity doesn't come up until later in the series. We'll see. I still want to give it a shot because if I did want to reread the later books at this point, I would want to reread all the earlier books first, which is why I have this. So this is a longer book than the others. It's over 400 pages, 430 pages. So it might take me a couple more days to get through, and I'll probably give a halfway update for this one. I hope I can just have a silly, goofy, fun time with this the same way I did when I was a kid. So that is the goal. And I'm so ready to cozy up on my couch under a blanket, enjoying the rain weather and reading The Angel Experiment. Even though this is technically YA, I think I understand why I could read it when I was really young, like when I was reading it like middle grade, because the chapters are only like 3 pages each. Like, here, I'll show you. So chapter 8, and then that's it. Like that's it. And every single chapter is like that. They're only like 3 pages. So it's incredibly choppy and fast paced, which is probably why like I absolutely flew through these books when I was little, because I could be like, I've read like 4 chapters, and in reality it's only like 8 pages of book. Okay, update time for The Angel Experiment, because it's been a few hours. I know I said longer book, and it is a longer book. It's 430 pages, but it still only took me like 2 hours max of reading to get to the halfway point, probably even less. I was not doing very concentrated reading, but it went really fast. And like I mentioned in my other update, it's going really fast because the book is paced really fast. It is like an action story, kind of. And like I said, each chapter is only like 2 pages long, and they're just constantly doing things, very much a lot of dialogue, a lot of like action sequences, things going very quickly. So that's probably also helps why it feels like it's moving so quickly and I'm getting through it so fast. But I am glad to be giving an update because so many things are happening as a result of that. This book is about a group of kids that have been experimented on by like evil scientists and given wings, and they are able to fly. But in addition to that, they also have other kind of powers, gifts, mutations, problems, and they're also like abnormally strong for who they are. It's just, I'll get to it. It's so fun, and the book starts out with they have been living on their own, free from those scientists for some years. The oldest people in the group are Max and Maximum Ride, Max, and Fang, who's a guy, and they're like 14, 15 years old. No, they're 14 years old, I think. Like only 14 years old. And then there's Iggy and Nudge, who are the next two oldest. And then there's the Gas Man, who I think they call like Gassy or something. They literally, they've all, if you're confused with the names, they all named themselves because they weren't like raised. They were like experimented on their childhood, so they didn't have names. They had to give it to themselves. But then there's the Gas Man, and then Angel, who is only 6 years old and is the youngest. And the six of them are like a squad. They call themselves a flock. This is the origin of my found family love. But the book basically starts out and like they have been living independently, kind of out in nature, just the six of them trying to survive for a few years. But then Angel, the youngest, the 6-year-old, gets kidnapped by these evil scientists and their henchmen to bring her back to the place they were raised, that they call the school, to be experimented on again. And all the rest of them have to go and help her. And we get multiple perspectives. We get stuff from Angel's perspective, and we get stuff from other people's perspectives, even when Max isn't with them. But Max is the first person perspective, main character. Everything is like, I this, I that. And everyone else is in third person when they do get a perspective. So, thoughts and feelings. At the halfway point, so much has occurred in terms of like the rescue mission going well and going badly and then going well again and going badly again and then going well again. It's incredibly incoherent. Like it's not... I don't know. I think the writing changes pretty dramatically for these books because we all know that they're ghost written, that James Patterson didn't actually sit down and write this story. But different books in the series have different ghostwriters, and I do remember the writing changing pretty dramatically in some of the books I like better in the series versus this one. I think the best way I can describe it is it's so camp. It's such, this Maximum Ride is so camp. It's not trying to be serious. In fact, it's actively trying to be very unserious. It has that kind of narrative, but it's so consistent. And it matches the tone of how ridiculous the mad scientist storyline is, how ridiculous their powers are. And so the writing kind of matches up with the plot in that way. So it just works. Like it's really, it commits to being kind of nuts and camp and iconic. I'm kind of in a good mood right now. I wasn't really enjoying the first 150 pages because a lot of like world building, character establishment that was very just dry, like cut and dry, boring, bland, especially because I remember a lot about these characters from when I was a kid. I've been starting to get into it. For one, there have been like more hints about the slow burn relationship of this like 10-book series. My first ever slow burn relationship, I think, when I was a kid, other than like the Harry Potter books, Percy Jackson and stuff. But I remember so much. I loved Max and Fang together as a kid. There's so much banter between them, and they're like looking to each other, and they are each other's pillars in terms of like Max supports the whole group and is their rock, but Fang is like her rock. He's there for her, she's there for all of them, and like that like kind of balanced relationship. I'm like, I see the vision that starts in this book and then gets fulfilled throughout the rest of the books in the series, and I can see why I would have liked it so much as a kid. But I am going to finish it up, and I hope it keeps going in the direction that it has been going the last 50 pages of just being a fun, silly, good time. Absolutely pure nostalgia, the enjoyment I'm getting out of this. I can recognize now more of the flaws in the writing maybe, but it's still creating that same like sense of like adventure and giddiness and attachment as it did when I was little. So I do love that part of it. We're so close. I could probably sit down and finish it tonight, but then I would have to film my like final update for this video, send off, in the dark. So I'm probably just gonna finish it either tonight or tomorrow morning and then wrap up this vlog tomorrow. And then we'll talk about every book I read in this video and how we feel about them as a whole. My week of nostalgia is almost coming to an end. All right, testing if it's warm enough to film outside this morning. It's not warm enough. It's not warm enough. Back inside we go. This is what I'm talking about with Fang and Max. Then Fang's arms, ropey and hard, scooped me up and I felt myself rising again. And he catches her when she falls. But then literally the next page, "Man, you weigh a freaking ton," he told me. "What have you been eating, rocks? Why, is your head missing some?" I croaked. This is my origin story for romance dynamics, I fear. Okay, minor spoiler, but it's so funny that I was like, oh yeah, Fang and Max have this slow burn. Literally in the first book, they've already kissed, but I really don't think they actually get romantically together, at least until book 6 or 7, maybe not even until the last book. It is a slow burn, it just is apparently a denial for denial slow burn. And just like that, we've reached the end of the most self-indulgent video I've ever made. Though to be fair, all of my videos are self-indulgent because I'm just doing this for fun. But this was especially self-indulgent, I've kind of realized, because I wouldn't really recommend any of these books. They were just, for me, they were just good. But that's not totally true. There are some I'd recommend in certain circumstances, and I'll get into that, but it was definitely still a really good time, and I enjoyed filming this, and you know what, that's all that matters. But before I get into summing up the whole video, I did want to talk about Maximum Ride, The Angel Experiment. The main thing you need to know about this book is that it's not good. It is not particularly well written. It's not well written at all, in fact, and it would be quite aggravating, I imagine, if I read this expecting a really good book. It still has a little kick to it. Well, I can't deny, it's actually a good comparison I feel like would be maybe the Maximum Ride books are kind of like a really bad CW show. If you ever watched I can't think of any of them. The Tomorrow People, if anyone has ever heard of The Tomorrow People, or any of those CW shows that were canceled after 1 or 2 seasons, where every single episode, the craziest thing you'd ever heard of in your entire life with zero world building was happening. That's what the Maximum Ride books are. In fact, I would love to see a CW adaptation of these books. I feel like it would be just as insane. This didn't hit perfectly. I think it veers too close on the edge of taking itself seriously. There are times when it's actually trying to impart lessons on the reader, and I'm like, oh, this book's, you're not writing a good enough book to do that. I would just skip those sections. I think in the later books in the series, they completely ignore that fact, and it just becomes fully action self-indulgentness. But I definitely still loved the characters as much as I did as a child. The main character, Max, you love. I put so much of myself on her as a kid. Fang is still ideal, brooding love interest, OG. And I love that even in this first book, they're goals. I love the two of them together. And I think it's definitely the origin of my found family obsession as a kid. Is the Maximum Ride books. Who wouldn't want to be part of a flock of bird people trying to save the world? We'll have to see. I have no plans to pick up book 2 right now. I could finish this series at some point if that would make a fun camp video talking about this series and these books in more detail and both making fun of them, but in a very loving way. Let me know if you'd be interested in something like that, and it might come up, but at the moment I will pause the series here and maybe come back to it when I'm in another reading slump and I need something fast-paced and just not too serious. So that is Maximum Ride, The Angel Experiment, an iconic series that I think becomes more iconic if you really get invested despite its flaws. And I was invested as a kid and I'm still invested now, so it exists as it is. Here are the books I read. I have a copy of Anne of Green Gables here that I'm going to use as a stand-in for Heidi. So pretend that is Heidi. And I kind of wanted to rank all of these by how much they stood up the test of time for me when reading. Surprisingly, in the beginning of the video I said The Frog Princess wasn't one of my favorites, but looking back now I'm kind of like, no, that one hangs up. It's for a younger age demographic than the rest of the books here, but for the age demographic it is, I think it still stood the test of time. Ooh, Heidi, or I hate to say it, but Maximum Ride might have hit harder than Heidi did for me, just in terms of sheer joy. But my number one is definitely Ranger's Apprentice. So the order is Room in the Heart, which just isn't my genre anymore, and yeah, it sucks because I loved it probably the most out of all these books as a kid, and therefore it had farther to fall in my mind now. The Frog Princess, which like I said is for probably a younger age demographic than the rest of these, and I think I liked the later books in the series much more than the first book. I think the series probably still holds up pretty well, but this first book, not as much. Heidi, I feel like in the second half of Heidi, it lost me a little bit more. It was very like preachy, life lesson-y, sermon-y, and maybe it's not fair to Heidi because I've also been reading, not in any video, I'm also reading Little Women right now by Louisa May Alcott, and I feel like that one does lessons for children through stories in a much better way than Heidi did. But it's still like that first 100 pages of Heidi is absolutely peak and still holds up, but it's just the rest of it I was kind of like, eh. And then Maximum Ride, The Angel Experiment, sheer self-indulgence for the craziest found family ever. Other than Angel, I forgot to mention this, but I remember hating Angel as a kid, which is weird because in the first book she's only 6 years old, but by the end of the series I remember hating her. But Maximum Ride, unfortunately, still holds up for me. Like, I had a good time and it went really fast. But number one was 100% The Ranger's Apprentice, the first book, The Ruins of Gorlan by John Flanagan. I talked about it a lot earlier, but it's good fantasy. Like, it's well-written fantasy. It's a very clear hero's journey, perfect for the age range it's meant for. You get really attached to the characters. They are allowed to grow and change even within just this first book in like a 20+ book universe. Despite the fact that I know that my favorite books in the series are the later ones, this first book was still 5 stars for me, and that was such a pleasant experience to get to read and have that. So I think Heidi probably has a higher rating than Maximum Ride in my mind, but if we're ranking them just based on how they hold up for me emotionally, that's where we're at. I might do another video like this in the future if I can think of more books that I loved as a kid. There are a lot of them, but not all of them are as quirky as some of these are, so they wouldn't necessarily make as good of a video. Like I mentioned, I think I want to read the entire Princess Diaries series again for a video. Even though both Jane of Lantern Hill and The Princess Diaries were two of my favorite books in elementary school, I actually reread both of these recently as like comfort books in college as rereads. So these were ones that I hadn't read in 10 to 15 years. No, at least, I guess. Definitely more than 10 years, probably more like 12 to 16 years. But these two I've read recently, so they didn't quite fit in the video, but I still think it's worth mentioning that the Princess Diaries series by Meg Cabot and Jane of Lantern Hill by Ellen Montgomery were also in my favorites as a kid. Thank you so much for sticking around for a totally self-indulgent video. Maybe if you have kids or young people in your life that you want recommendations for, hopefully this helped, because despite my own little critiques of how these affect me as an adult, I think all of them are really fun for kids. And I loved all of them as a kid, so I can definitely see any kid liking any of the books I've talked about in this video, and I'd recommend them. But yeah, that was a good time. I just spent like a week just reading kids' books. That I was on a bit of a reading slump after coming back from a trip, and that was exactly what I needed to get back into reading again, to make reading fun again, was to read books that I found really fun. I will leave it there. Thanks again for watching. Feel free to like, comment, subscribe, whatever the heck you want to do, and I guess I'll see you in the next video pretty soon. Toodles!